Welcome and good morning. Thank you for joining us again for our live streaming of the HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy here in Indiana University, featuring activists from all over the country, like the lovely Stacey Jennings right here from South Carolina. Good morning, Stacey.
Good morning, everyone.
I want to welcome everybody to our second full day of coverage. As you can see, we've got a boisterous crowd, as we always do, and you'll be hearing from a lot of them from the main stage in a moment. But while we're waiting for that to begin, we want to thank our sponsors. The SERO Project and Positive Women's Network are the main sponsors, organizers of this event. And this live stream is being brought to you by the HIV Justice Network on behalf of HIV Justice Worldwide. So a lot of thanks for them putting this together. You know, we've been watching the live streams after the fact and are thrilled with the quality and our audience. Do you know that there are thousands of people that have been watching this thing throughout the week?
Yes, it's fabulous. It's awesome.
So we've got a wonderful audience, and for those of you who are sharing this live stream, putting it on your organizational pages and all of that, we really appreciate it. It's bringing a great audience to this very important work. And speaking of this very important work, so Stacey, you have been involved in HIV activism for how long, did you say?
23 years.
And you're in South Carolina,
yes,
which I imagine is going to be a challenge to be in the Deep South, working to advance not just criminalization issues, but HIV in general.
Yes.
What kind of work do you do? This is your first conference, by the way. This is your first
my
HIV
first conference, and I'm so excited.
Tell me about it. How has the experience been for you as a first timer?
The experience has been simply phenomenal. I tell you, I've met a lot of people, but it's like I'm a celebrity because people know me just from what I do, just from my work. And I've had people come up to me and say, Stacey, I finally get to meet you in person, and it felt so good.
You're a rock star in the HIV arena. Isn't that great?
Yes.
And actually, it's family here. It's like a family reunion.
Yes.
You know, there's so many people who are doing I say this is the grassiest of the grassroots when it comes to conferences, because we're all camping out here. This is a lovely campus and all of that.
It is.
But we are not in the Hilton. We are staying in dorm rooms. I don't know about you. I'm staying in a dorm room.
I am too, and it's okay.
You know, it's okay because it's kind of like we're just camping out together.
Right.
You know, and we eat in the cafeteria. There are not a lot of frills in that way, and I think that we kind of wear that badge very proudly, don't we?
Yes.
You know, there are other conferences that we all attend and we are very grateful for. You will not see, you know, a lot of corporate sponsorship type of stuff here. Mm-hmm. This is for and by and led primarily by people living with HIV.
Yes, it is.
What does it mean to you as someone living with HIV to find community here around this issue of criminalization?
It is heartfelt to be able to come to a common place where I see my brothers and sisters striving for the same goal. And I tell you, I feel so uplifted because I'm able to give back as well as receive.
Mm-hmm. You are a poet, I know, because we saw you at the opening plenary do a poem about Bully, about which was Blacks United Leadership Institute,
yes,
which was a pre-conference we had, which was a day devoted specifically to activists of color.
Yes.
And tell me why you think it was important help people understand why it was important that we created space specifically for Black activists.
I believe it's important that we create a space specifically for Black people because it's rare, and there's not many times that activists of color are able to come together under one accord. And I tell you, it was strong, it was uplifting, it was unified. Just all of that. And it was a wonderful experience.
Well, and it's great because we are leading into a plenary this morning, which is about building a racially just movement for HIV criminalization.
Yes.
And this is led by, I want to say, all the biggest names in activism, but it's actually a panel I am really excited about. Because you've got Kenyon Farrow and Robert Suttle and Maxx Boykin and just people that Waheedah Shabazz-El, and just people that I greatly admire.
Amazing.
And to see them all on one stage, teaching us will be terrific.
Yes.
And they were behind your pre-conference that you had, I suppose. So you've been spending a lot of time with them.
Yes, I have.
What was the pre-conference like? What sorts of things did you learn?
I learned about coming together as a community, holding one another up, because this is not an easy fight. But as long as we stand together, we will never fall.
And when it comes to HIV criminalization, as we know, these prosecutions, when you look at the prosecutions compared to the population at large, we have much greater, more prosecutions among people of color than we do among the general population.
Yes.
And so, obviously, it's important that we create this space.
Exactly.
I am going to speak now to Barb Cardell, whom we love.
That is
girl. Because they're one of the co-sponsors. And thank you so much, Stacy. I wonder if I can get you down off of this box without you breaking your leg. Let me help you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great conference.
Okay, you do the same.
One of the co-sponsors of this event is the Positive Women's Network USA. I like to brag about them because I consider them the hardest working activists and the fiercest. You know how I'm always bragging about the Positive Women's Network.
Absolutely.
Every chance I get in my writing.
You're a biggest fan, Mark. Absolutely.
I am a big fan.
Yes.
And it's because of people like you and the fact that I see a lot of our HIV movement in general being driven by women. I will sometimes say that activism is driven by those with the most to lose.
Absolutely. That's very true. And that's why the Positive Women's Network is celebrating 10 years fierce in activism and advocacy. And we do. Women have often been neglected in conversations around HIV access, prevention, treatment, and care. And so we need to make sure that our voices are front and center. That's part of the reason why this morning's plenary is going to be so important, is we're talking about centering people of color. And they are often overseen and neglected in this conversation, and they also have the most to lose as we move forward and we start to address the epidemic, the root causes of the epidemic, understanding systemic violence against people of color. I'm really excited for the plenary this morning to start hearing a little bit about the bully session, the Black United Leadership Institute, because I have talked to people in passing and I've heard it's been a powerful opportunity to build advocacy and energy and excitement about leaders of color coming forward. They've actually always been there, but getting support from allies like myself and like you as we center them in the conversations that are so important around HIV and really advocacy and action.
I will sometimes write about the fact that I see, when I say activism is led by those with the most to lose. In other words, gay white men, we kind of got what we came for. We kind of got what we came for a few years back. We're on PrEP, we're undetectable, we have access to health care, and now we've kind of gotten married and are living in the burbs. And that's a terrible overgeneralization because clearly there are gay white men involved in the movement. But you know what I mean in terms of we've kind of exited the battlefield, a lot of us, and have left women and people of color to do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, that is actually true, and I think that it is really important to talk about advocacy that is led by those of us who are still here and who have always been here doing the activism and the advocacy. And I think it's wonderful that we had such strong leaders at the beginning who were able to create things like the Denver Principles and to share power and privilege in a way that advanced the HIV conversation in the early days in ways that it probably wouldn't have if we didn't have white gay men who had access to funds and to celebrities. But now you're right. Many of my friends who are living with HIV who are white gay men are married and have children and have gone back to work. And unfortunately, that privilege and that access has not trickled down to other women living with HIV and people of color. When we look at the epidemic and we know that young black gay men are so at risk of acquiring HIV, have such a difficult time accessing care, we need to make sure that the conversation now shifts to involve those who are most impacted.
Oh my gosh, it would appear that Barb Cardell and I have broken the internet.
Yay.
For the first time in our live streaming, we have somehow had technical difficulties and lost our connection. But not now. Now we're back. We're wondering who pulled the plug on us and why.
Absolutely. I would laugh and say that the white gay men that we were discussing and inviting back into the conversation,
that we were critiquing in the most loving possible way.
That they might have just tripped over the cord to the internet on their way to come and help us is what I think happened.
Exactly.
Yes.
Or to comment feverishly.
Mm-hmm. And to say to pledge that they're here in the conversation and the moving forward.
That's right. Well, it looks like we're getting started with that very important plenary on racially just criminalization efforts. So, Barb, thank you for your co-sponsorship, and thank you for watching. Be sure to share the hashtag.
Like uplifting news this morning. Everybody knows Trevor Poppy.
HINAC3, HINAC3, and share the live stream. Thanks for watching.
For punishing disease. So, no, he's done a lot of work, obviously, with criminalization in that book, and it's nice to see it get recognized and spread the word. So, with further ado, and no more slide changes, Rebecca.
All right, happy second day of HINAC, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. This is Towards Liberation, Advancing a Racially Just HIV Criminalization Reform Movement. And we have our amazing moderator. I'm pretty sure a lot of you already know him, Kenyon Farrow. And I will leave him to introduce the rest of our panelists shortly. I do have some quick announcements I want to get through. First, I want to say welcome to the Facebook Live audience. I'm happy to have you join us, and please do send in your questions. There will be a Q&A portion towards the end of this plenary. For Breakout 3 today, we cleared up some room confusion, so the attitudes and opinions about HIV criminalization workshop is going to be in 118, and the multi-level support for people living with HIV facing criminal charges is going to be in 206. We are now able to take credit cards at the t-shirt table. That's going to be available after this plenary as well. Awesome. The state poster board displays are coming down today at 6, so please make sure you're taking anything with you that you would like to save. Finally, we still need a lot of volunteers to facilitate sessions today, so please go to the reg desk, the registration desk, if you're interested in that, and we'll get you set up. All right. And with that, I'll hand it, one more?
Quick lost and found.
Quick lost and found.
We'll leave it up front.
All right. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Kenyon.
Oh. Matt. Yeah, I'll do introduction and then I'll bring them up. Yeah. Gotcha. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming to this session and attending the HINAC conference in general. I'm really excited to be facilitating this panel Towards Liberation, Advancing a Racially Just HIV Criminalization Reform Movement. I'll say just to start, for myself, I have kind of come at this work, somewhat from both perspectives. I started my organizing work largely around criminalization, particularly focused on criminalization of queer youth of color in New York City. And then with Fierce, if you know Fierce in New York was first getting off the ground in 2000. And then later was the first Southern Region Coordinator for Critical Resistance. If you know the work of Critical Resistance, is a national organization whose work is to end the prison industrial complex in all of its forms and formations. And so when I think about, and as I was doing that work, we were in the early 2000s when the conversation about men on the DL was the national HIV conversation. From that, so much of that conversation was about kind of men in prisons and the sex men were having in prison and what it was doing to sort of threaten, you know, people on the outside. So I began to kind of think about that and HIV sort of criminalization through that lens. When I moved back to New York and started working with Community HIV AIDS Mobilization Project, or CHAMP, which later became HIV PJA, I hosted actually this month, it was May or June of 2008, so 10 years ago, a weekend retreat of prison activists and HIV activists to talk about what we were seeing in terms of this sort of nexus of HIV, of criminalization, of treatment of people who are HIV positive within the criminal justice system, et cetera. That was called Project Unshackle. And so this is a lot of the work that's been happening around HIV criminalization. I've been really excited to see the movement happen and see some of the kind of early work that I was involved in that kind of helped, you know, bring some of these things together. So I'll turn it over to our panelists who are going to talk more specifically about how they see their work and in HIV criminalization and racial justice. First, we'll have a report back. Many folks here have heard, if you were not, folks here in the audience attended the Black United Leadership Institute, what my folks said. If you did not attend, we will give a report back first from Waheedah Shabazz-El from Positive Women's Network and Robert Suttle from SERO Project. And then we will move into other presentations from my co-panelists here, Toni-Michelle Williams from SNAPCO, Atlanta, Georgia. Naina Khanna from Positive Women's Network. And Maxx Boykin of a lot of organizations, but of Black AIDS Institute, Black Youth Project, and probably a few others that I have forgotten. Maxx Boykin. So first up, we'll say again? Oh, sorry, Mark. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. My honey. Right. Sorry. Yes. Also, Marco Castro-Bojorquez of HIVenas, a really exciting new project looking to bring more Latino voices who are HIV positive into the criminalization movement, which is really exciting. Thank you. Thank you. So first up, we will have Waheedah and Robert give us a report back from Bully. Woo!
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's really good to see you all's face this morning, so I hope you all are feeling good. Yes. So a little report back on Bully with the Black United Leadership Institute in recognition that criminalization, the first ever, Black United Leadership Institute we had happens over the past 3 days. It's been, I would say it's been a great experience to have this group of Black leaders come together in this space, and I'm really happy that it happened here at the HIV Is Not a Crime conference. I couldn't think of a better way or intersection into this conference by having this institute established and to have a place where we can begin to identify the things that we need to understand about HIV criminalization, particularly from the Black experience. And so over the course of 3 days, we came together to examine the effects of HIV criminalization on Black people and how HIV criminalization reform movement connects to larger efforts to end racist and policing practices and mass incarceration. And so some of the things that we touched on were defining criminalization and racial justice, mapping the movement, analyzing the HIV criminalization movement, and refining the issue, and again, planning the strategy. And I think for this group, there are a lot of people that are new to the movement. which is wonderful because we always need new people. And I'm really excited as someone who's been involved in HIV criminalization reform work for a few number of years, even though it's not been a long time as long as others have done their advocacy. But I'm really proud of this space to bring in new people as well as those who are experienced in other works to come together to understand the importance of HIV criminalization reform, which is only a piece of the issue around mass incarceration. And so I'm glad that we came together to at least make those connections and so that everyone can understand where their place is as far as in the movement, because there's plenty of space here for all of us to be involved. We just need to find a way to get involved. And also to understand the meaning of what it is to talk about HIV criminalization. And so a lot of our people are new people into the movement, and it's important that before we even begin this work that we at least come together to show ourselves love, to understand and appreciate our blackness before we can even take any steps forward.
That's right.
And as someone who has been involved in this for a number of years, it allowed me to take a pause, to step back, to see what my community needs, what my people need. And I'm really glad that we were able to establish Bully to be sort of the kickoff, the launch of what is going to be a great movement in addition to this HIV criminalization movement, but also something that's going to strengthen our black community, our black leadership community, and also bring us more and closely together so that we can fight the fights that we need to fight on all fronts. And so that's my report, and I'm going to extend it over to Waheedah.
Great, thank you. So, good morning. Good morning. You all look very beautiful. Thank you. So what happened this year at HINAC was that a Black Senate movement of HIV criminalization advocates was born. And I think yeah, let's hear that, right? And so I want to thank you all for hosting us. We were centered on blackness, and just as Robert just spoke about, many of our Bully attendants expressed that this was their very first time ever experiencing an all-black space. And we found that there was a need for collective healing in that space, for people that get it, being in a black space. And then there were people who don't get it, who are just shaping their analysis. We found that we needed different levels of engagement. We talked about, mentoring people and people who understood the analysis and bringing people along with us. We also talked about the importance of identifying as black and not identifying as African American, because we want to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind who lives the black experience. Right, so we talked a lot about that, and it was a very, very rich conversation. The initial impact that we saw coming out of Bully was that our attendees came into HINAC conference and seemed to be stronger. They seemed to be more vocal in other sessions, particularly the policing session. They were intentional about taking up space. There was a session about rape and intimate partner violence where men who suffered the same types of situations were not hardly mentioned, right? So folks are speaking up. Even in this plenary, people made a conscious, intentional decision to be here early to sit up front in these seats up front. Where my people at? Thank you so much. Yeah. And then even going beyond this space, we are committed to calling out when we hear misgendering or when we hear racial statements, even beyond this space. Now, what shape Bully's going to take is a question mark there, because, like I said, we found that we needed collective healing, and so we're going to trust the process. We know there's going to be a process. But one thing that we feel that we may be doing is responding to people's letters, help raise legal fees for folks who are incarcerated, of course, create webinars and toolkits that we can develop rapid responses, create relationships with journalists that write problematic stories that perpetuate this negative, dominant narratives about us. We want to create a place where we can grow black perspectives for black attorneys, right? And this group is committed to repealing HIV criminalization laws as opposed to modernization. We want them to go away. Yeah, we push them back against being identified as sex offenders, and we are committed to having a multi-generational movement. So some general next steps, right? I'm starting, and everything I'm doing, I'm quoting what people said in our debriefings. First time ever doing this was wonderful. This was our first time. We should continue making time for us to connect. Yeah. Right, and that came from one of our participants, and we appreciated the space. We needed to have that small Black Centers group. We need to have places we can share more resources, more information about what to expect at conferences. Some people wanted to know. For some people, it was their first time attending the conference. It was good to hear where our community stands in terms of identifying as Black. We want to continue doing education and most likely through webinars. We talked about the Black side of the red ribbon, right, and looking to find our place as leadership. And some people even talked about exploring their history about Black leadership in the HIV movement. We talked about separating into groups, trans groups, young groups, elder groups, so we come up with a list of priorities, and that way when we come into these spaces, we can tell people how we want to work and how we want to organize. We need folks in the room to get involved, of course. We need to build our own curriculum, mentor our folks. We talked about Facebook groups, Twitter handles, and of course live streaming. Our next steps for building this Black-centered movement is hold and cultivate Black spaces and forums beyond HINAC, connect to every major conference, preparing Black activists to intentionally take up space in those conferences, doing fundraising so that we can have longer, people wanted to have more time together, developing monthly calls, Google groups, Facebook groups. And then this is my last slide I want to share. We also challenged ourselves that when we leave here, we're going to go back. What are going to be how are we going to take Bully back as an individual? How are we going to take it back to our organizations? How are we going to take it back to our community? And these were some of these comments are from folk who were in the room individually. Some people said they would learn about the Black side of the red ribbon, the history of Black leaders in the HIV movement. Someone else said that they would create more space for others to take the mic and for others to grow. This is still individually. Someone said they would continue to live their fucking life proud to be and supported by Black people. And someone said that they would devote themselves to Black liberation. And then when it came to organizational challenges or organizational commitments, they said they would bridge the gap of HIV intersectionality at their organization. Someone at GHMC said they would host a Black symposium. Someone said they would challenge their organizations to create Black spaces and resources, standing up against pushback and being unapologetically Black. Yeah. Yes. And then for our community commitments, someone talked about some students at a predominantly white school in Virginia, and that they have been wanting to have that Black space. Because they want to talk about the trauma that they face attending a predominantly white school. So that person has plans to take back what he learned in Bully to his community and support those young people in that school to establish a Black-centered space. And that was my summary of all of our debriefs and talkbacks. And I'm happy to take questions later in the program. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move now to have the rest of our panelists really talk about kind of racial justice and how they center racial justice in their kind of ongoing organizing and advocacy work. And we'll start with Maxx on the end.
Can I just say one thing really quick? I remember when we went to the first HIV is Not a Crime conference in Iowa, the Grinnell Gathering, and Waheedah, I aspire to be in a panel with you, and today is such a special day for me because I respect the intentionality that Waheedah has in her presentations, and for me is the highlight of the conference.
So
Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
What's up, y'all?
Hey, Matt.
Like Kenyon said, my name is Maxx Boykin. I work at the Black AIDS Institute. Something that HIV criminalization is still very new for the Black AIDS Institute to work upon. But seeing a need really to talk about this as the larger criminalization issue that impacts black people, right? And 2 years ago when I was here, there was a couple things that we had addressed that I feel like people didn't fully understand, and one of those is defining anti-blackness as when we talk about racial justice, right? And I just want to, the Council of Democratizing Education defines anti-blackness as being a two-part formation that both voids blackness of value while systemically marginalizing black people and their issues. The first form of anti-blackness is overt racism, right? When we think about the Klan, we think about what happened in Charlottesville. Those are, or when the white person, calls you a nigger when they're driving by and they're mad at you, or when the police are overtly racist to you when you get pulled over. Those are the ways in which we think about it, right? But that also includes systematic racism, right? And upholding the institutions that actually impact us every day, right? And when those institutions, and that can happen in marginalized communities, where you still see anti-blackness around people of color. And at the Black AIDS Institute, it's our people, our problem, our solutions, right? But we also understand how the systems, as we had talked about in panels before, was like how the systems impact us, right? And we have to think about how we are decolonizing those systems. Right? Those systems that are continuously impacting us in ways that make it so states can move forward with laws that leave out black people, right? Leave out black people at the table when we are trying to make decisions, and it allows for when a large organization who has more money, that tends to be white-led or tends not to be actually led by the people that are most impacted by HIV criminalization, will take the lead on an issue without community support, without actually fostering that community in order to actually make it happen, right? And move forward with not their best interests. We have seen that. Right, and I have heard from black people in about at least 6 states, right, and people that are living with HIV who are not black, who have said this is a problematic issue that we are continuously seeing right now, right? And for us, it was an important piece to come in and talk about, like, how can we actually uphold and create black spaces, train folks on talk about how we can dismantle anti-blackness, talk about racial justice, get rid and talk about anti-oppression, and even talk about the oppression that happens within intra-community. Right? And think about how we can end those. So those are some of the things that the Black AIDS Institute is working on. As also a member of Racial Justice Now, that Nana and Charles, when they had called us all to come together and really talk about how in which we think about that, and trying to really uphold the pieces of that framework, talking about American exceptionalism, talking about how we end anti-blackness, talking about how we must dismantle the institutions that are actually supposed to be here to help us, that are actually not doing so, right? We have to think about how we continuously do that. So that's a couple of things that I'm working on.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And so I think it's important to also, obviously we'll move to Nana, to really talk about both the work of Positive Women's Network and really, as Max just stated, was along with Charles Stevens of Narrative Project, a year ago, really helped kind of lead a new group of folks to really start to think about racial justice broadly as it relates to the HIV movement, brought us together in New York, and then created Racial Justice Action Now network. And so, Nana, please talk to us about your work and vision for racial justice. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the meeting that Counter Narrative Project and Positive Women's Network co-convened last year in July of 2017 in New York. So Charles Stevens, I'm sure many of you know him, And I kind of worked together to raise some resources so that we could bring together people of color leaders in the HIV movement to strategize. We talked to a lot of folks, and a lot of people were telling us there is a need to elevate racial justice, right, in our movement. So this beautiful photo by Johnny Cornegay is one of many images of us working together over a couple of days of really kind of deep and intense and honest community building work. So why did we do this work? Well, we did this work in the context that we were operating in 2017. So as you all know, I don't think I need to talk about the administration and sort of its outright, kind of racist antics towards many people of color, black and non-black people of color, including this is actually this top thing on the slide here. That's actually a screenshot from the whitehouse.gov website, the violent animals of MS-13, right? This administration is systematically dehumanizing people of color, black and non-black people of color, and this is not accidental. It's very purposeful. When you dehumanize people, you can justify taking resources away, not treating them with dignity, not honoring human rights because they're not human, right? We were also in a context of our fighting for our basic health care. And so fighting back on the Affordable Care Act being repealed. And we all know that this comes from like a much longer legacy of people of color within the HIV movement and in the world being systematically attacked, brutalized, and dehumanized. So the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously rose up in response to that. Barbecue Becky, this happened, right by where I live. This is Oakland. Barbecue Becky was in Oakland, in Lake Merritt. Oakland is like a historically black city that is being gentrified. And so Barbecue Becky happened in a racialized context. And she's a funny meme, but this is not funny. Because when you call the cops on black people, we know what can happen, right? That's how people die. So that, she's funny, but she's not funny. And, but also within our own movement, we know the work of racial justice is not new. As Kenyon said, many folks have tried to elevate this conversation in different types of ways over the years. There's also been a systematic erasure of some of the black and non-black people of color leadership in this movement, leadership by trans folks. You don't see that in the big primetime TV shows and videos and specials on early days of AIDS. That's just not a visible part of the story. But people of color have always been here and always leading the way and always pushing the envelope. And in fact, we have Pride Month because of a black trans woman. So we really need to look within our own community too. If you look at the way resources are allocated, there's also a very obvious sort of underfunding of people of color-led work, and that happens at the local community level, it happens at the national level. Many organizations across the country are kind of disappearing off the landscape, and these are really important organizations that have been led by and serving black, brown, and other people of color for many years. And they're being either, kind of absorbed, underfunded, lots of different systems and structures have been kind of impacting the types of services that can be available for people living with HIV. And people wanting to get tested and access prevention services for HIV. So this has consequences. It has consequences because there are not spaces that are community-centered, that are culturally responsive, that are led by the people actually most impacted by the epidemic. And, Max talked a little bit about this phenomenon of what I call snow capping. Some people call snow capping of organizations where, you have your constituency, your client base, your membership base that is primarily black and brown folks who are needing services. But sort of as you go up the leadership ladder within that institution, you see a progressive whitening, right? Once you get to the top, it's real light up there. It's real shiny. So, and that's, you know, like lots of organizations where many frontline workers do reflect the community. But as we heard yesterday, there are never opportunities for advancement. And once you get to the top, to management, to executive leadership, to the board of directors, how well reflected is the constituency being served? So these are some of the things we're trying to shift. And so our calls to action, kind of coming out of that, well, our calls to action for the meeting, and you can see a lot of this on a website that was also built by Johnny Cornegay. Thank you, Johnny. Shout out to Johnny. I'll give you the link for the website at the end. Our calls to action were to the community, to integrate racial justice into our organizations and into our political strategies. So why is this so important? Our community is under attack in lots of ways. There are organizations in DC and outside DC that are fighting back from an advocacy perspective. But advocacy is different from organizing. And policy work is different from grassroots work. And so we really wanted to be intentional about elevating grassroots, people of color-led work in these advocacy discussions and discourses. Because when you're having to respond quickly, we actually need a robust people of color network that can inform advocacy strategies and policy recommendations quickly, right? We must center those communities that are most impacted by the epidemic in leadership and decision making. And so we talked yesterday about MIPA and the need for a MIPA that is not race neutral, that is not gender neutral, that really accounts for power even within the community of people living with HIV. So rooting our efforts to advance racial justice in accountability to the communities that we ourselves are leading. Equity around allocation of resources. This is a big one, as I talked about. And as Max mentioned, working to transform and where we have to, dismantle institutions that are upholding white supremacy and that are actually compromising the well-being of our communities. Because we don't have time not to. So some of the key tenets that we also sort of uplifted in our document are that we honor our culture. Culture is important to us as a diverse people of color. And we committed to proactively combat and undo anti-blackness and challenge that within not just from a white-black binary, but within non-black communities of color as well, because anti-blackness is real in all communities and it has deadly consequences. We also talked a lot about addressing U.S. exceptionalism. So our legacy of, U.S. imperialism and exceptionalism and this idea of like what is American and what is not American and that American is even a good thing to be is very problematic. And so, we really want to center that discourse as well. Root cause analysis and addressing systemic inequity are also critical. And so, our sort of key questions are, what does it look like when we align as people of color under current conditions in community work and we collaborate, right? And we collaborate in ways that are not patriarchal, in ways that are not about a scarcity mentality, about competing for resources, but are really about our vision, and our vision that transcends the institutions we've been given. Our vision that is actually about creating a world that is well and just and right and liberated, right? And so what happens when we actually begin to share our resources? So at a real practical level, does everybody really need a back office to do our work? Can we share a back office and do our work? That's just an example of, thinking about how we could share resources. Could we share communications staff across organizations and expand our reach that way, especially for organizations that are less well-resourced, that are really trying to uplift voices of people of color? So And then also we sort of honored the need to support within institutions and for ourselves. As Waheedah was talking about, the importance of Black-only spaces, of Latinx-only spaces, of racial caucuses, that is actually important work for safety, for dignity, for communities to identify their own needs. And so, I know we had a discussion about this last night in the plenary session, and there were some different opinions on this question. Our contention is that absolutely any response to HIV absolutely must be rooted in racial justice. It's not optional. And so what is racial justice? This is going to be my last, I think my last slide. So what is racial justice? This is how we defined it. The collective practice of people of color and allies to identify, dismantle, and heal from the many external and internal harms of structural and institutional racism. This practice invites us to collaborate across communities of color in the service of dismantling white supremacy and building power. Because we're very clear that white supremacy can't exist if we are aligned, right? If we are aligned and we work together in solidarity. And so the movement that we envision is premised on solidarity, on collaboration, and in coalition. And so I do want to give a shout out to all the folks who have been part of this process. We have continued to meet for the last almost year. We meet monthly. We have working groups. We have a communications and media working group. We have a structure working group because we're still sort of figuring out how we're working. We launched an interim steering committee. These are all the beautiful people who were at that meeting in July. Again, this photo was taken by Johnny, and I also want to give a shout out to Olivia Ford, who couldn't be here because she just had a baby, but she played an instrumental role in she played an instrumental role in shaping our document, and we invite you to join us. And I guess I forgot to put the website on here, but I will give it to you if you need it later. Thanks.
Thank you. One of the things I've been paying attention to in my role as senior editor at the body over the last several months is, so we know that the Trump administration obviously has used a lot of racism and xenophobia to kind of operationalize massive deportations, the separation of families through the deportation process. There have also been a number of cases of folks who are HIV positive who have been deported. And there has not been a lot of media reporting, and I don't have the media resources to look at whether or not there's an unofficial policy to, if you find immigrants who are in fact HIV positive, that they are kind of expedited for deportation. But we published one story about one gay Mexican immigrant who was deported and through pressure was actually able to return to the United States. But I've actually gotten emails from a number of lawyers where there have been several others that have happened over the course of the last year. And certainly we know the administration has used in just sort of private meetings that got reported, talks about, well, why can't we just rescind the special protection for Haitians who were given visas after the 2010 earthquake and deport all of them because don't they all have AIDS anyway? So the ways in which HIV is kind of being operationalized in the conversation of immigration deportation processes. And so with that in mind, I would like to turn it over to Marco to really talk about the formulation of HIVenas and your new campaign and organizing project to address those concerns. Thank you.
Yeah. Buenos días. I want to ask if the Latinx or the people that identify as Latinos or Latinas could stand up this morning. Thank you so much for like joining me. I feel stronger. Deportation is only one of the many attacks that the administration has declared war on us. And I have to say that I am very lucky to be part of this community, but I'm also very lucky to be invited to do work. And the work that we're doing on racial justice is important because the immigrant movement grew up of the racial justice movement. And so it's important that we own the fight for racial justice because it's our own. And the website and the work that Naina was talking about is also in Spanish, because we have translated the statements and the main documents that we have on our efforts for racial justice. And I wanted to acknowledge that the work of other people, other leaders like Bambi Salcedo, who came and came with me and worked with me on that week that we stayed together, those few days. And I also want to I also have been lucky to push and to ask my colleagues, other people of color, to work with me on pressuring the HIV movement to do more work on immigration. I equally do the fight to pressure the immigrant community to do more work on HIV, because for some reason there is not a lot of work on HIV in the immigration movement, and there is not enough work around immigration in the HIV movement. I have been very lucky to be able to continue pressuring and publish statements. On May 1st, a couple years ago, I think that Naina started the work with Charles around this issue, but last year we were able to publish a statement where we're asking the HIV movement to do more work on immigration. And this year, on May 1st, I was also lucky enough to, because I have been dealing with mental health issues for the past couple of years, and in a harsh situation where I lost my home and my work, my job, etc. But I was able to luckily start feeling better in December. I retrieved myself to the mountains of Northern California, and I became to feel better. And so I took the opportunity to ask my colleagues to come together and do another statement, and we did. Incredible people work on that statement, but I also relaunched HIVenas Abiertas, which is a network of Latinx people living with HIV. And the work that we are just restarted, the reason because we relaunched that is because I wasn't really feeling well enough to do the work for the past, because we announced that network in Alabama. And so from the statement that we did this past May 1st, I just want to read for you this paragraph where we sum the attacks on the immigrant community by the administration. And it's basically ICE raids and mass deportations. There are multiple versions of the Muslim people, the ban on Muslim people for entering the U.S. There is also the ending of DACA without any reason, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program that, in my opinion, was the most clear or with most clarity, the only victory that really immigrant people had during the administration of President Obama. And the program was taken down by no reason. There is also the termination of temporary protected status for numerous African, Asian, and American countries, which is, I find, incredibly damaging that the administrations feel strong enough to just take your soil, take your ground where you're stepping and take it off like that. There is an escalation of hateful, xenophobic rhetoric from everywhere, like Naina just shows in that slide. And the separation of children from their parents when they enter this country is a new rule where the administration is doing, is basically, is persecuting folks that enter this country, and they take their child to an agency and they put into detention centers their parents, where before you would detain and then asked to be back to your country of origin without any persecution. And then the last thing that I feel, let me just drink some water because I just because sometimes I don't know how we can handle the many attacks that come in. The last thing that I want to talk about is the new rule on public charge that the administration hasn't implemented, but basically the rule on public charge is that if you are coming to this country and you are applying for any immigration status, if you ask for any public health, or if you appear that you're going to ask for any public health, they can just immediately put you into deportation procedures. And so HIV is just one aspect of the many aspects of the lives of Latinx people, immigrants living in this country, that is under attack. And we are not going down with at all. And we, as Nana was saying, our culture, the altar, this T-shirt that I got from my friend Carrie, that she sent me for this plenary. These are the things that make us stronger. The beautiful shirts that I see with my black brothers and sisters in the front. The culture and the relationships that we form is an important step for us to be stronger. So Venas Abiertas is a network that is just beginning the work. And as Naina said, we're going to focus our work at just making sure that we first ask our other HIV Latinx brothers and sisters, how are you doing? What can I do? What can I do to work with you? Because we don't really know exactly in mass how is it that the HIV Latinx people, how are they doing? What are their really needs? And I bet you that if I talk to the folks that they stepped up this morning when I ask, which you're welcome to come to the altar tonight, we're going to find out how is it that they're doing and today, right? And what can we do? Organizing Latinx people living with HIV that are immigrants is very difficult for the many reasons that I just mentioned, the many attacks that I just mentioned, but it's not impossible. And I also feel that I am so true I have the certainty that we have the power of transformation. The Latinx HIV, the people living with HIV that are Latinx have the power to transform not only ourselves, but our communities. And we're not going to do that without your support. And just lastly, I just wanted to honor Roxana Hernandez, which is a transgender woman who died in the hands of ICE. She was part of the caravan that came to the U.S., and Roxana passed away. We're going to have a day of action on June 6th. Please go to any website, Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement, an organization that I'm a co-founder. We are organizing a day of action on May 6th to honor Roxana's. June 6th. Tomorrow.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. So while we talked a lot about the importance of networks and building for racial justice, both connecting folks at sort of, particularly at kind of like national levels to build these sort of strategies. I'm always really excited, and part of most of my own sort of organizing and grounding has been in really focusing in local cities and organizing, queer and trans folks. My own case with young folks and then with folks in the New York City shelter system over a number of years. And the Racial Justice Action Center and SNAPCO in Atlanta is an example of embodying really building power among grassroots folks in very particular kind of communities, neighborhoods, and cities. And so I'll turn it over to Toni-Michelle to tell us more about her work at SNAPCO and racial justice.
Cool. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I just want to thank you and give thanks for her life, and also just remind us that whenever we grieve, there's just a little bit of joy that still exists underneath the grief. And in Atlanta, we can celebrate Miss Estrella Sanchez, who just got asylum and now is safe. Yes, Estrella! And now has asylum and can be safe at home with us in Atlanta. So sending her some love and some joy as she's still here fighting with us. Yay! So I'm Toni-Michelle Williams. I'm an organizer. I am a leadership development coach and coordinator with SNAPCO, and I'm also a trap healer. And what that simply means is that I believe that in order for us to win this thing, we have to go to the trap. We gotta go to the projects and the ghettos, and we gotta remember that our grandmas and our cousins and them are sitting on the couch really looking for us to be the model of what transformation is and what transformation looks like. I'll start by just acknowledging that today I have with me some great support from Georgia all together. All of my ATLians, where you at? Yes, yes! Come through. And more particularly, getting to the work, I'm so blessed to have been able to start and develop and run a internship program that is an organizing intensive for Black trans folks in the city of Atlanta. We are in our third cohort, in our third year, and our cohort is with us here at HINAC. Would y'all please stand and give them some love? Yes. And Camilla stand, because Camilla is a graduate of the second cohort and is now staff with SNAPCO. And so what we are in the business of doing is really developing a leadership pipeline for Black trans folks to go through, and not to just learn hard skills about campaign planning, decriminalization, but skills toward embodiment, embodiment of the individuals, the people that they want to be in this world, that they want to model in this world. And I'll just say really quickly, Camilla is staff with us because she has been committed to her embodiment in that journey. And so we're really, really blessed to have a group of folks, 3 cohorts who have done amazing work. Our first cohort of the Atlanta Trans Leadership, aka ATL, get comfortable. My babies love to clap. I'd love to clap too. Our first cohort of the Atlanta Trans Leadership Program really did tremendous work in developing and forcing the city of Atlanta and Fulton County to develop a pre-arrest diversion initiative. And we were successful in that in 2015. And some folks have reservations about pre-arrest diversion, right? We talk about repeal, we talk about ending criminalization, and we talk about abolishment, right, of these systems that oppress us. And so what does it look like to actually have to work with these assholes, right? And we know that it's hard, and we know that right now in this moment when our trans women are dying, when our girls are being criminalized because they're carrying condoms on them in Atlanta, or because folks are getting arrested and thrown into the city jail just for spitting on the sidewalk, or jaywalking, or having a broken tail light in Atlanta, we know that there has to be transformation now. And that means that we have to be prepared. We have to be in a good practice and towards some form of collective embodiment that transforms those systems right now while we're here. In our first cohort, did that. We've developed, like I said, the pre-arrest subversion initiative. Taviana, which is our intern, she actually is a resource specialist for the initiative. And so, like I said, we are about creating our own institutions that work for us so that our people can be employed. And so in those opportunities of employment, that we're cultivating a culture that is that they're seen and that they're heard and that they're respected and can be in their fullness and in their dignity while they're there, so that they can do the work the best ways that we can and how we need them to. Yes, pre-arrest subversion. The first cohort also did some badass work with releasing a report called "The Most Dangerous Thing Out Here is the Police." And if you haven't heard about that report, you can go on our website at snap4freedom.org to take a look at that. That report, again, was led, created, written, graphics done by black trans folks in Atlanta, right? In 2013, the city of Atlanta wanted to pass an ordinance that would banish people who were convicted of sex work. And we're talking about banishment. Like, if you get locked up, bitch, we're gonna send you out and you won't be able to come back. And so folks came together, trans folks, our cis queer and straight allies, all folks who were engaging in sex work, folks who are formerly incarcerated, folks who are struggling with mental health issues, folks with disability was like, no, baby, that's not going to happen. Because if you're banning our family, that means you're banning us. And I don't know if y'all have been to Atlanta, but in Atlanta, you go through Atlanta at least 5 to 10 times a day, just because there's Atlanta right here, there's Decatur right here, there's Lithonia right here, there's all of the places. And so you really won't have access to the employment that you need. You won't be able to navigate to get to a job, to go get your nails done. You can't go to the city to get to a meeting with us. And so we knew that we had to come together and fight that. And since then, we've been in this practice of, again, developing leaders so that we can be, trans folks can lead those movements, right? So we had a report, all the things, I'm just trying to go through the work, hallelujah. And last year, our second cohort, Camilla, was really instrumental in reclassifying marijuana as a non-arrestable offense in the city of Atlanta. And what that work looked like was literally my sisters, black trans women, having to go to the trap. Had to go to the trap in the West End areas of Atlanta to get, and we got over 600 postcards from cishet black men who were catcalling us when we were by MARTA, who didn't want to take a postcard from us in the beginning, who didn't even want to take a bottle of water from us, to the women who were grabbing their children when we approached them. These are the stories of what outreach on the street, when these organizations are asking us to show up, to do the work as black trans folks. This is what happens when we're out there doing the outreach, right? This is what it looks like when we come back and we're tired and depleted and we don't want to go back, but then, but we need that coin so that we don't have to trick that night, right? these are the experiences and the stories of my sisters. And what this third internship and this third cohort has in store for them is to really create a space for the first ever Black Atlanta Trans Summit that we, yes, the first, that we will come together and actually practice what a collective embodiment towards this liberation looks like. We're going to practice what it looks like to include gender in a racial justice framework, because we know that we can't overlook that. We can't not talk about it. We can't not talk about it. Now, in 2018, people have been, over the past 5 or 6 years, I call it a trans train. Baby, y'all's been jumping on that hoe, okay? And in that, and what I mean by that is that for the past 5 years, y'all have been requesting for trans people, Black trans women in particular, to pour our stories and our trauma, Black people in general, right? Which is why we're even here on this panel, to have to pour our trauma, to pour our experiences out for your learning. And what we are in a practice of asking is like, when are y'all going to just start practicing so that we don't have to teach you now? There are toolkits and organizations and all of the things. Google, baby, for you to get what you need as allies to be able to show up, to be ready to practice, not show up and take space to ask questions, right? And I'm really, really excited and honored to share space with these brilliant folks to figure out what that's going to look like. And in our bully, we were able to kind of get into what that could look like a little bit, right? We talked about what practice is, what's important for us, how, we talked about a lot of things, but mainly what it will take for us to model the vision that we are declaring to the world. As folks who are directly impacted, Black folks living with HIV, trans folks who are living with HIV, who's trying to, decriminalize HIV, and who's all of us who are really trying to like be in our fullness, to have dignity and respect in this fight. And we really talked about how we would do that together. And I just want to highlight some things that came out of that. Perfect. We talked about what it would look like for us to embody a sense of belonging. As we talk about organizing and mobilizing communities, one of the biggest barriers we know is stigma. And even for folks who are living with HIV, Black folks, trans folks who in organizations who are organizing trans people, why is it so hard to get them to show up? Why is it so hard? Why is it just one person fighting in South Carolina? There are other people, right, who want to fight. And so how do we model in a way that is captivating, that really brings them? And how do we develop a sense of belonging within ourselves that invites that within our folks? We talked about regenerating safety for ourselves. And in those moments that we are triggered, in those moments where white people say fucked up shit and talk about and make references of other Black people that have no idea of our experiences. When cis het people or cis people say fucked up shit to trans women, like, girl, you're so beautiful. You're one of the beautiful ones. What does that mean, right? How do we get back to feeling powerful in that moment when we're asked to be on this panel or be out in the audience and speak and live our truths? How do we regenerate safety when people ask us, how did you get it, right? how do we get back to our center? How do we get back to that? We want to be able to practice that and embody that. How do we let go of our shame so that folks are invited to walk with us in glory, right? And how do we befriend and love our triggers and our conditions that keep us safe, right? So if I am a bitch that pops off, how do I love that? And how do you love that too? Because there's a story behind that. And how are we practicing being together? How are we listening to each other as we're working? I think Nana said something so important. I think I have like 1 more minute. But Nana said, working in solidarity is, is what we have to do. And sometimes I say that that's not enough. Working in solidarity is not enough. We have to move in solidarity, and that takes practice, that takes coordination. And we have to be intentional about what that looks like and how we're doing that. And my invitation to you all is, number one, everybody say, invest in Black trans leadership.
Invest in Black trans leadership.
Everybody say, invest in Black trans leadership.
Invest in Black trans leadership.
Marco talks about transformation. We all embody it in so many ways. And if we stop forcing our folks and our girls in particular, our Black trans women, to go out and do outreach and actually invest and create, allow them to create spaces that they're able to feel their power and know why the fuck we're here, right? Versus y'all asking us and we keep pouring out to you. Give us spaces to where we can learn and create it for ourselves and practice it so that when we come out to y'all, we can really show y'all what transformation looks like, because that's what we do. And so what does it look like for us to all be empowered by our transformation stories, right? Because we've all gotten to the other side of something. Thank y'all.
So I'm gonna, we have about 12 minutes for some Q&A, and we will open it up to folks in the audience with questions and comments. I think Tanika.
Thank you, Michelle Harris, Fort Wayne. This was my very first experience with HIV is not a crime. I was also delighted to be invited to the very first bully. I hope to have the opportunity to come again, to learn more, to experience about different people, not just myself, everyone, so I can continue to go out into the public and do the best that I can to put this word out about AIDS and HIV and how it can be stopped.
Thank you. Takia.
Hi, my name is Camilla Harris. The question I have, and this is for actually everyone on the panel, how are we going to work together in this racial justice reform movement with HIV, in decriminalizing HIV, and also educating our cisgender community? Because I was told last night that cisgender women, especially Black women, don't know nothing about PrEP. How are we going to get that message out there to them? That's just my question. And how we can work together to do that.
So first piece I want to answer is the last one. The Black AIDS Institute just created a Black toolkit specifically for Black women around access to PrEP, right? And we're working with other organizations to continue to put that out there because we do want to be able to talk to that. But not just cisgender women, but also trans women, and specifically talking about how in which we talk about PrEP with Black women, because that has not been the majority of the marketing that has been particularly at a piece, but also even having access for it to Black people. Another piece, to talk a little bit more, one, I want to be very honest. I am not really about reforming these laws, and I want to be very honest about that. And we've talked about it a little bit in the bully, and this, again, it gets died down at times. I am about repealing these laws altogether. I am about getting these laws completely off the books, right? As I said 2 years ago, we're not going to modernize our self-deliberation. Like, you do not do that, right? You actually have to think about how you completely get rid of these laws. And as you also think about completely getting rid of these laws, thinking about how we're also educating ourselves throughout it, right? I have been in rooms where white men who are sitting here right now today, and I will be honest about that, have sit across from black people and not listened to them, right? Have black people living with HIV and have tried to go around them multiple times, have slowed down processes about trying to move forward with these laws because they thought it was best in their best interest to move it in a particular fashion, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about MIPA, we talk about these things that are truly important to us, we talk about them, and they will go right back and continue to move forward. So I think about how in which we actually hold these people accountable, right? As we create these spaces for people of color, and especially black folks, right, to actually be able to come in, and when they come into that room, right, and when we talk about moving policies, make sure that there's a person living with HIV, specifically a black person living with HIV, and really it should be a black trans woman that is having to do the sex work, that has to actually, and make sure that they can actually be taught up, right? So when you are moving that policy, you are actually building the skills, so we are actually building power, right? I do not want to actually just sit on the sideline, right? I do not just want to have, when we train up our volunteers, they should not have to sit on the sideline. They should actually be in the room making those decisions, right? Arnita said this when we talked about California. Just because one organization has more money does not mean that they are able to carry the big stick and move everything their way, right? But we have seen that. I have seen it in Illinois. I have seen it in Missouri. I have seen it in Georgia. I have heard about it in California. I have seen it in too many states, and it is not okay, right? Right? And we have to think about, and for those of you that are in this room, and thank you for coming in, and you are not a person of color and you are trying to learn this, I want you to learn how to check your privilege, right? I want you to understand that you also have, I understand that you may also come from a marginalized community in many ways, but that does not mean that you are not understanding the intersection of how people are impacted by this, right? And just because you have a cab or a board that you said, oh, this is what we want to be able to do, does not give you the right to speak for the entire community, right? And make sure that you are actually moving forward, that you actually build all those people together, and actually so, when, say, political times do change, as we saw from the Obama to the Trump era, that we still have the power, when they want to move these ridiculous laws and take rights away from us, we have the power to write back against it, because that's actually building power and not building alignment to power that can always be taken away.
Yes.
I have two questions. One, if Nana, if you can give us that website, and two, Waheedah, you mentioned when you were talking about bully. For those of us that were not selected for bully, can you tell us how we can become involved? Oh yeah.
Yeah. So to become involved in bully. Is simply you just have to be, first of all, you just have to be a black person. And that's first of all.
Come on together.
And you have to give your email address to that lady standing right there in the gray shirt. Right? Yeah. And so we encourage all of you. Maybe some people didn't know that when you apply for your scholarship, that there was also an opportunity for you to apply to be the part of the bully. Maybe some people didn't know. We did have an affinity session last night, and the room was filled with people who were not at the original Bully Institute. So it is a movement and a phenomenon. It's taking legs, and we want you to be a part of that. So anybody that has not been officially a part of Bully and wants to be a part of Bully, just make sure that myself or Anita has your contact information, and we're creating a Google list. We make sure you get on it.
And I want to say that we are following your steps. The Latinx community, I have I have great hope that in our next HIV is Not a Crime conference that we can have our institute as well. So I'm just going to put it out.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob. What I want to say is that we always talk about in Bully and also here in Indy, we always talk about have a meeting before the meeting. And so that's very important for people of color and also for black folk because we have to have the meeting before the meeting because we cannot go in front our counterparts who is Caucasian persuasion that is we cannot argue among in front of them because they're going to look at us and say, oh, they want something, they argue among themselves, and so they're going to ignore us. So we have to have that conversation, that hard conversation among ourselves before we sit at that table, before we go to that meeting, before we have that fix your face moment so they won't know our attitude at the table. Yes, I said fix your face moment because our expression is very prominent on how we feel. So that means you have to be a stern face and keep your emotion in check. Yes, I say keep your emotion in check because sometimes us black folk and people of color are very emotional. So when we start talking and get heated, we lose our thought and process. So we have to check our emotion, check our face, and then also have that meeting before we go into that meeting because we have to know what we're going to say in front of them. Now, I mean, people, the Caucasian persuasion, and so we know how to articulate our thoughts and when you sit in front of them. Okay?
Yes. Thank you.
So,
Go ahead, Max.
I hear you with that one, and I definitely understand. I am known to have a meeting before a meeting. Johnny and Eric Polk actually knows that very well in Georgia. But on top of that, though, I have seen while we try to get ourselves together, that those organizations will then move around and go around you and continue to meet and move forward because they have those relationships with legislators and will actually completely keep you out as you are organizing for yourselves, right? And how in which we try to keep, one, I think you have to, one, is like, I challenge those that have that power and have that ability to meet with those legislators to think about how in which they are impacting the community when they move forward without them, right? And allow for things to get a little messy, right? Because that's the only way that you'll actually be able to build, like, you have things, if you expect things to go perfect, and you are only going for that win, that immediate win right then, you are actually failing the larger movement, right? Yeah. I understand when you have to modernize your way and eventually in increments to be able to get closer to repeal. But if you are doing that without actually building any community support, then you are actually not actually getting to the point that we need to get, right? So allow for people to get a little messy, right? Allow for people to build those skills. Allow for that chance to actually learn, and then, and also because these are real people, and if these are the real people that need it, we need to allow them to have that chance to be very real in those spaces at times, right? So being able to have that.
I would, if I could, just take Facilitate's hat off for a second. I also think that if you are, so what we see was mentioned in the kind of iterations of some of the early formations of different, kind of activist movements around HIV, particularly ACT UP, that rage and yelling and screaming is celebrated, right? Movies made, awards won, et cetera, but we also need to be clear that they're expressing anger in situations where people continuously try to dismiss, move around, not invite you to shit, call your boss when they don't like the position that you took, although you were the policy director and could make that decision, which has happened to me before, by people in this room. You can't, at some point, I'm gonna cuss your ass out, right? So, and I will be, and I'll work with you after that, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, I never shut the door entirely, and more often than not. So I think that the question is not about having to control so much, but about being strategic, allowing people a space to grow, but also not backing down from like your position and what you know is actually just. That's it.
And thank you. And the only thing that I want to add is that you named a type of practice that was just some prep, right? But we also know that presence is like more important than prep. And if we are practicing how we are being in our presence, right, then when things get messy, we know how to come back to each other. And that's the practice that we should be in. That's the basis and the principles of the meeting before the meeting, not necessarily the agenda or the content, right? But again, how we're being intentional about being together and making sure that those folks who are directly impacted are being together and leading that moment.
Can I just also, capitalism and how capitalism express itself on issues of love and even health. When I was dealing with mental health, people would say to me all the time, get better and then come to do this work. I'm like, I don't have the luxury to get better, and I don't have to be perfect to work. I do not have to be perfect. I do not have to be, quote unquote, healthy to work, because otherwise I'm going to be waiting all my life.
Thank you. We at time, y'all. I wish I could take more. I saw another hand in the back. So one, I just give another round of applause to our panel. Robert, Suttle, thank you again for your presence and your attendance, and we'll pick up at the next small breakout sessions at 10:30. Thank you.
Thank you.
My peoples, where you at?
Hi, this is Mark S. King with My Fabulous Disease, welcoming you back, or at least at the end of what was every bit as passionate and dynamic and candid as we expected from this plenary on racial justice. What more can I say? Well, I certainly have nothing to add, and has been made clear from the podium, nor should I. This is their space. This is the space of people of color standing their ground and explaining the justice, the racial justice involved in criminalization and in activism in general. It was thrilling and humbling to watch. We have more to come at 2:45 this afternoon. We will be continuing with people of color by featuring those from Mexico and Colombia. A wonderful session from them. Oh, listen. Oh, okay. They're going at it. It's very, very exciting in here.
Keep this shit together all damn day. Okay.
We have more to come at 2:45 when we do go for the Mexican and Colombian delegations, talking about what they're doing with some phenomenal successes in their countries. And we'll see you then. By the way, we hear you, our audience, our live streaming audience. We thank this live stream, HIV Justice Network, for the live stream, but we hear you. We see you in Waco, Texas, in New York City, in Swaziland, in New Orleans, people across the country and the world who are joining us for this live stream. We see you. We're sharing your comments with the panels, and we thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you at 2:45 p.m. today for our next session. Thank you very much.